Now that we have the pieces laid out, I'll show you how to go ahead and cut the grooves. Let's talk about the assembly we have here first. If we look at the setup here, first off, I'm using 2 miter gauges. I think that always makes it a lot more stable in terms of sliding back and forth. To limit my travel, I've put a dowel rod in that I'll go up to and won't go any further. And on the back side, I've mounted a block where the dado head doesn't come through at all. Basically, it's completely encased. To help limit finger exposure, I have a piece of polycarbonate here that'll keep my hands from getting too close to the blade. Additionally, the L fence, I cut straight through it with this dado head, which is a 1/4 inch setup. What it gives me is a really clean line, so there's no guesswork in terms of where's the cut going to be. I know exactly where it's going to be by the very void left from the dado head. Now that we have our setup all ready to go, let's actually cut the block molding. First, I'm going to make a sample cut here just to check my depth. From looking at it, I think I probably ought to just go a tad bit higher. That looks better. That notch I just cut gave me the depth of the first cut, which I'm going to repeat all the way across the face of the board. To do that cut, I'm going to simply line my pencil mark up with the edge of the void, making sure that the dot is in the middle. That's the part I'm taking away. Now that I have all the grooves cut across the face, I need to cut the voids that go between them. For that, we're going to have to raise the dado head to 5/16 of an inch. So I'm going to take my marking gauge and make a cut, slice a score mark that I can then set the blade height to. Now that looks pretty close because the crest of the tooth seems to be just in line with my scribe mark. Now that I'm close, I'll make a sample cut just to make sure I have the right height. To make these series of cuts, it's really easy. Just line the groove up with the void from the dado head. You can't miss that way. Make sure you keep your hands really far away from the blade. And make sure when you pull the carriage back, you pull it back a good distance. Although you might not need it, it's really easy to get a second piece. So flip the stock over and go ahead and cut the other edge. For the time spent, it's well worth it. Now that these are cut, the next step will be to rip them off in strips. To make the cut a little bit safer, I clamped a piece of 1/2 inch MDF down on my table saw and raised the blade through it. This gives me support everywhere. It lets me use a splitter. It just makes the cut a lot safer. The push stick is fit to my sample. The notch is long enough to hold the whole piece down and deep enough not to hang up. To keep the dental mold tight to the fence and to keep my hand away from the blade, I use an auxiliary piece of wood to apply gentle pressure. Make sure you don't put any pressure onto the blade itself. Now that we've cut the block, let's talk about the Greek key and how we cut that. This setup for the Greek key is very similar to the other one. The blade kerf establishes the width of the groove. To make the cut, I simply line up with one side of the groove, make the cut, slide to the other, and then complete the cut. I'm using, by the way, a 10-inch rip blade here that has a flat top. Having cut all the slots on one side, flip it over and repeat the process, cutting the other. Having cut these, let's look at how we actually put them on the clock itself. I put my dental mold up on the flat and visually center it so we have an equal amount of reveal on each side. With that done, I'll hold a sample piece my side molding on, butt it up to it, and transfer a pencil line across showing where it has to be cut. Using this little shooting board and a handsaw, I cut it close, and then with a guide block and an iron for my bench plane, in a slicing motion, I cut the miter. Check the miters to make sure that they're going to be nice and tight when they're finally glued. I've gone ahead and glued the first side and the face. Let me show you that gluing process though with the final piece. I'm going to put a little yellow glue and just squeeze it into that miter just to get a little bit of glue soaking in so I don't end up with a dry joint. Now while that's soaking in, I'm just going to put a little droplet on each one of these. You don't want too much glue or the squeeze out can be problematic. It's not holding the case together, it's just a decorative element. I'm going to put a little more glue on there just to replenish what's been soaked in. I don't want to be sliding this because if I have too much sliding, I'll get squeeze out. A piece of tape to keep the miter tight, a little bit of dry pressure. I'm just going to put a cleat on it and working off the top a spring clamp. Just being careful that I protect this edge. This doesn't need a ton of clamp pressure. It just needs to stay in place long enough, and then we'll let it dry. With the glue dry, I took the clamps off. And the process for doing the Greek key would be the exact same approach. Now there's a lot of styles for dental mold. Do a little research and maybe come up with something on your own. Either way, you can see it's a nice addition to the project.